Hi, welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, I'll be featuring the case of Ted Kaczynski. This will be part one in a two-part series. He was also known as the Unabomber. Let's go ahead and find out more. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Theodore John Ted Kaczynski was born on May 22nd, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. At 6 months old, Ted's body was covered in hives, and he was placed in isolation in a hospital where visitors were not allowed. He remained in this hospital getting treatment for 8 months. From grades 1 through 4, Ted attended Sherman Elementary School in Chicago, and he attended grades 5 through 8 at Evergreen Park Central School. In 5th grade, it was determined through an eye test that Ted had an IQ of 167. So he was then allowed to skip the 6th grade. Ted describes this as a pivotal time in his life. He remembers not fitting in with the older children, and he recalls being bullied. As a kid, Ted had a fear of people in buildings, so he played besides children rather than interact with them. He attended high school at Evergreen Park Community High, and it was during this time that he became obsessed with mathematics. He would spend several hours locked in his room practicing differential equations instead of socializing with peers his own age. He was placed in more advanced math classes, yet he still felt intellectually restricted. He excelled so much, he was then also able to skip the 11th grade. Well, Ted went on to graduate high school when he was only 15 years old, and he was then accepted to go to Harvard University. At the age of 16, he went on to earn an undergraduate degree, and then later earned his PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. Ted's specialty was geometric function theory. One of Ted's math professors, Peter Duran, said of Ted, quote, "He was an unusual person. He was not like the other graduate students. He was much more focused about his work. He had a drive to discover mathematical truth," end quote. Ted went on to become an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley at the age of only 25. He taught geometry and calculus. However, his students didn't take too kindly to him. He received numerous complaints, and his students had low ratings. What the students said was he was uncomfortable in a teaching environment. He often stuttered and mumbled during his lectures, and he would become excessively nervous in front of a class. When there was designated office hours, he would just flat out ignore his students. He ended up resigning 2 years later. In 1978 is when Ted unleashed the first of his homemade bombs. Over the next 17 years, he would mail or hand deliver a series of increasingly sophisticated explosive devices that would kill several and injure so many more. The first mail bomb was sent in late May 1978 to materials engineering professor Buckley Christ at the Northwestern University. The package was found in the university parking lot at the University of Illinois in Chicago with Buckley's return address. However, he noticed that the address writing was not his own. Well, he was mysteriously suspicious of this package that he did not send, so he contacted campus police, and a gentleman named Terry Marker came to assist the professor with opening the package. Well, the bomb exploded immediately. Luckily, the officer that assisted the professor only received minimal injuries. The bomb was made of metal that could have come from a home workshop. The primary component of that bomb was a piece of metal pipe about 1 inch in diameter and 9 inches long. It contained smokeless explosive powders, and the box and plugs that sealed the pipe ends were handcrafted from wood. The trigger device was a nail that was tensioned by rubber bands designated to slam into 6 common match heads when the box would be opened. The match heads would immediately burst into flame and ignite the explosive powders. Well, after this bombing, it was followed by more bombs that were sent to airline officials. And in 1979, a bomb was placed in the cargo hold of American Airlines Flight 444, a Boeing 727 flying from Chicago to Washington, D.C. The bomb began smoking, which forced the pilot to make an emergency landing. However, there was a faulty timing mechanism that prevented the bomb from exploding. Authorities later commented it had enough firepower where it could have obliterated the plane. Well, the FBI now became involved, as bombing an airliner is a federal crime in the United States. They came up with the codename Unabomb, which stood for University and Airline Bomber. In 1979, an FBI-led task force included the ATF and the U.S. Postal Inspection Services. They were formed to investigate the case. The task force would grow to 150 full-time investigators in analysis. This team made every possible forensic examination of the recovered components of the previous devices, and they studied the lives of the victims in excruciating detail. In 1980, Chief Agent John Douglas, yes, the John Douglas, who worked with agents in the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit, issued a psychological profile of the unidentified bomber. This profile described the offender as a man with above-average intelligence and had connections to academia. A 1-800 hotline was now set up by the Unabomb Task Force to take any calls that could possibly identify who the Unabomber was. In fact, a $1 million reward was offered for anybody that could provide information leading to the capture of the Unabomber. 1971, Ted moved to a remote cabin that had no electricity or running water in Lincoln, Montana. He began to teach himself survival skills, for example, tracking, edible plant identification, and how to construct primitive technologies such as bow drills. And this was happening as he saw the land around him get destroyed by development and industry. He started to continue to perform isolated acts of sabotage, targeting the developments near his cabin. The catalyst that drove him on this campaign was one day he was taking a walk near one of his favorite wild spots, only to find it had been destroyed and replaced by a road. Ted later spoke of this and said, quote, "The best place to me was the largest remnant of this plateau that dates from the tertiary age. It's kind of a rolling country, not flat. When you get to the edge of it, you find these ravines that cut very steeply into cliff-like drop-offs, and there was even a waterfall there. It was about a 2-day hike from my cabin. That was the best spot until the summer of 1983. That summer, there were too many people around my cabin, and I decided I needed some peace. I went back to the plateau, and when I got there, I found they put a road right through the middle of it. You just can't imagine how upset I was. It was from that point I decided, rather than trying to acquire further wilderness skills, I would work on getting back at the system. Revenge." End quote. Ted began reading more books about sociology and books on political philosophy. He soon came to the conclusion that more violent methods, the only solution to what he saw was the problem of industrial civilization. He says that he lost faith in the idea of reform and saw violent collapse as the only way to bring down the industrial system. About the idea of a reformist means of taking it down, he said, quote, "As I see it, I don't think there is any controlled or planned way in which we can dismantle the industrial system. I think that the only way we will get rid of it is if it breaks down and collapses." Now, in 1985, the first serious injury occurred when John Hauser, a graduate student and captain in the United States Air Force, lost 4 fingers and his vision in one eye The bomb that exploded for him was handcrafted and made with wooden parts. 1985, Hugh Scruton was a 38-year-old California computer store owner and was killed by a nail and splinter loaded bomb placed in the parking lot of his store. 1987, a similar attack against a computer store occurred in Salt Lake City, Utah. The bomb, which was disguised as a piece of lumber, injured Gary Wright when he attempted to remove it from the store's parking lot. The explosion severed nerves in his left arm and propelled more than 200 pieces of shrapnel into his body. 1993, Ted mailed a bomb to David Galertner, a computer science professor at Yale University. He was critically injured. However, luckily, David survived. 1993, a bomb was mailed to the home of geneticist Charles Epstein from the University of California, San Francisco. When he opened the box, he lost multiple fingers upon opening it. 1994, Burson Marsteller, executive to Thomas J. Mosser, was killed by a mail bomb sent to his New Jersey home. 1995, Gilbert Murray, who was the president of the timber industrial lobbying group California Forestry Association, was killed by a mail bomb that was actually addressed to the previous president, William Dennison, who had previously retired. And that is the end of part 1. In part 2 is when the Unabomber will start to communicate with the media. We all have heard of his manifesto, but we're going to find out more, so stay tuned. Thank you for joining me for an episode of Danny After Dark. Do you have any questions or comments about the case? Well, leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Most of us have heard of the Unabomber, so let's talk about it. Do you have a suggestion for a case that you would like me to cover? Well, leave it down below in the comments, and you may see it featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us.